March 26, 1960. Miami Beach. Two legends. One stage. And a confrontation nobody saw coming. Elvis Presley, the kid who'd just gotten home from the army, walked onto Frank Sinatra's set with a question that would change everything. What Frank said next didn't just shock the audience. It rewrote the entire history of American music. The lights at the Fontainebleau Hotel blazed white-hot that night. 300 people packed the ballroom. Tuxedos, cocktail dresses, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with cigar smoke. ABC cameras rolled. This was Welcome Home Elvis, Frank Sinatra's primetime special, and the biggest television event of 1960. But backstage, something else was brewing. Elvis stood in the wings, 25 years old, fresh-faced, still wearing his army buzz cut even though he'd been discharged 2 weeks earlier. His hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves about performing. He'd done that 1,000 times. No, this was different. He was about to confront the man who'd called rock and roll the most brutal, ugly, desperate, vicious form of expression, just 4 years earlier. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, the voice, the man who'd owned American music for 2 decades before Elvis even picked up a guitar. And Elvis had questions. Let's rewind for a moment. Elvis exploded onto the scene like a grenade in a church service. Heartbreak Hotel hit #1. Girls screamed, parents panicked, preachers condemned. And Frank Sinatra, 40 years old, watching his record sales plummet, went on the attack. He told a reporter in New York that rock and roll was phony and false, and sung by cretinous goons. He said it was music for juveniles with no taste. He predicted it would die within 6 months. Elvis heard every word, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. He was too young, too new, too busy trying to survive the hurricane of his own fame. Instead, he kept his head down, kept recording, kept performing. And then, in March 1958, Uncle Sam drafted him. 2 years in Germany. 2 years away from the spotlight. 2 years wondering if America would forget him. They didn't. When Elvis came home in March 1960, he was bigger than ever. And Frank Sinatra, the same man who'd trashed him 4 years earlier, suddenly wanted him on his television show. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Backstage at the Fontainebleau, Elvis paced in his dressing room. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, sat in the corner, chomping on a cigar. "Just sing the songs, boy," the colonel said. "Don't make waves." But Elvis couldn't let it go. Nancy Sinatra Jr., Frank's daughter, 19 years old, wearing a pink dress, knocked on the door. "5 minutes," she said softly. She'd been assigned to escort Elvis to the stage. Her father's orders. Elvis looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" Nancy nodded. "Does your dad? Does he really think my music is garbage?" Nancy's eyes softened. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said something that would stick with Elvis forever. "My father's complicated, but he's a professional. And professionals evolve. Professionals evolve." Elvis held onto that phrase as he walked toward the stage. The confrontation happened in the hallway. Not on camera. Not in front of the audience. But in that narrow corridor between the dressing rooms and the stage entrance, where the wallpaper was gold damask and the carpet was thick enough to muffle footsteps. Frank Sinatra was walking the opposite direction, coming back from a quick smoke break, when he nearly collided with Elvis. They stopped, face to face, the old guard and the new. Frank was wearing a tuxedo, perfectly tailored, his blue eyes sharp and calculating. Elvis wore a black suit with thin lapels, looking every bit the young soldier still adjusting to civilian life. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elvis did something nobody expected. He extended his hand. "Mr. Sinatra, I need to know. Did you mean what you said? About rock and roll?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Frank didn't shake his hand immediately. He studied Elvis, really studied him, like he was seeing him for the first time. Not as a rival, not as a threat, but as a human being with feelings and fears and doubts just like anyone else. Then Frank did something even more unexpected. He smiled. Not a fake show business smile. A real one. Small. Almost sad. "Kid," Frank said quietly, taking Elvis's hand. I said a lot of stupid things. I was scared. Elvis blinked. Scared. Terrified, Frank admitted. You came along and changed everything. Every rule I knew about music, about performing, about connecting with an audience, you threw it all out the window. And yeah, I fought it. Because change is terrifying when you're the one being replaced. Let's pause here. Because what Frank said next is what left everyone speechless. Not the audience in the ballroom. They had no idea this conversation was happening. Not even the producers or the camera crew. But the handful of people in that hallway, Nancy Sinatra, Colonel Parker, a stagehand named Jimmy Rosselli who was adjusting a microphone stand. They heard it, and they never forgot it. Frank looked Elvis straight in the eye and said, "But you know what I realized? You're not replacing me. You're not erasing what I built. You're just adding a new chapter. And that's what great artists do. They don't tear down what came before. They build on it. They honor it. They transform it into something new." He paused, then added, "I was wrong about you, Elvis, and I'm man enough to say it." Elvis's eyes welled up. He tried to speak but couldn't. Frank squeezed his shoulder. "Now come on. We've got a show to do, and I want you to sing that rock and roll stuff as loud and as proud as you can, because that's your truth. And truth is the only thing worth singing about." That conversation lasted maybe 90 seconds. But it changed everything. When they walked onto that stage together, Frank in his tux, Elvis in his black suit, something was different. You could feel it in the room. The tension that had been building for 4 years, the cultural war between generations, the fear and anger and resentment. It all melted away. They performed a medley. Frank sang "Love Me Tender," Elvis's song, in his smooth, crooning style. Elvis sang "Witchcraft," Frank's song, with his raw, rock and roll energy. They traded verses, smiled at each other, even joked between lines. The audience went wild. 30 million people watched it on television. Critics called it the moment American music grew up. Variety magazine wrote, "Sinatra and Presley proved that great artists don't compete. They collaborate." But none of those critics knew about the hallway conversation. None of them knew about the apology, the vulnerability, the humanity. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Let's talk about what Frank actually meant when he said, "Professionals evolve." Because this wasn't just about two musicians making peace. This was about something much deeper, something universal. Fear of obsolescence. Frank Sinatra had dominated American music since the 1940s. He'd been the voice of World War II soldiers, the soundtrack of post-war romance, the king of swing and big band and everything sophisticated. He represented elegance, control, precision. And then Elvis came along. Wild, uncontrolled, sexual, dangerous, everything Frank wasn't. And America's youth went absolutely crazy for it. So Frank lashed out, not because Elvis was bad, but because Elvis represented the end of Frank's era. And nobody wants to admit their era is ending. But here's what Frank eventually understood. Eras don't end. They evolve. Rock and roll didn't kill what Frank built. It built on top of it. It took the emotional honesty of jazz and blues, the showmanship of big band, the storytelling of country, and synthesized it into something new. Elvis wasn't Frank's enemy. He was Frank's heir. After the show, Frank invited Elvis to his dressing room. Colonel Parker tried to follow, but Frank held up a hand. "Just the kid," he said. Elvis walked in. The room smelled like whiskey and aftershave. Frank poured 2 glasses of Jack Daniels, even though Elvis barely drank, and handed one over. "Sit," Frank said. Elvis sat. Frank leaned against his vanity, studying Elvis again with those sharp blue eyes. "You know what the hardest part of this business is?" he asked. Elvis shook his head. "Staying true to yourself while everyone tries to turn you into something you're not." Frank took a sip. "They're going to pull you in a million directions, kid. Make you record songs you hate. Put you in movies that insult your intelligence. Tell you to smile bigger, sing softer, be more palatable. And if you're not careful, you'll wake up one day and not recognize yourself in the mirror." Elvis listened, absorbing every word. But here's the secret, Frank continued. The only thing that matters, the only thing is the truth in your voice. When you sing, are you telling the truth? Are you feeling it? Because audiences know. They always know when you're faking it. And they'll forgive anything. Bad notes, missed lyrics, whatever. As long as you're telling them the truth. He set down his glass. I attacked you because I forgot that truth. I let fear make me a liar. But you reminded me what this is all about. So thank you. Elvis finally found his voice. Mr. Sinatra, I grew up listening to you. You were my mother's favorite. When I was a kid in Tupelo, we had one of your records, I'll Never Smile Again. And she'd play it over and over. You taught me about phrasing, about making lyrics matter, about... He trailed off. About what? Frank prompted. About how to make people feel something. Frank smiled. Then we're even. They shook hands again. This time it meant something different. Not peace between enemies. Brotherhood between artists. Nancy Sinatra would later write in her memoir that her father came home that night lighter somehow. Like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying for years. Elvis told his friends that meeting Frank was like getting permission from the principal to be yourself. But here's what most people don't know. That conversation, the one in the hallway and the one in the dressing room, didn't just impact Elvis and Frank. It rippled outward. 3 weeks later, Frank went on radio and retracted his 1956 statements about rock and roll. I was hasty, he said, and I was wrong. Rock and roll is here to stay, and it has as much validity as any other form of musical expression. The kids who love it aren't stupid. They're responding to something real, and I respect that. It made headlines. Sinatra makes peace with rock and roll. Elvis kept the newspaper clipping in his wallet for years. But the ripples went further. By 1963, Frank was recording rock-influenced songs. By 1965, he was praising the Beatles, the next generation of young artists disrupting everything. By 1967, he was collaborating with Antonio Carlos Jobim and exploring bossa nova. He never stopped evolving. And Elvis? He took Frank's advice to heart. Even when Hollywood tried to trap him in formulaic movies, even when the Beatles came along and threatened his dominance, even when his career hit rough patches in the late 60s, he kept searching for truth in his music. The '68 comeback special? That was Elvis remembering what Frank told him. Strip away the fakery. Tell the truth. Feel it. But let's go deeper. Because this story isn't really about Elvis and Frank. It's about you. How many times have you felt threatened by someone younger, smarter, more talented? How many times have you lashed out at change because it scared you? How many times have you confused evolution with obsolescence? We all do it. We see someone doing things differently and we panic. We criticize. We attack. We defend our territory like animals cornered by predators. But what if we did what Frank did? What if we paused, looked the threat in the eye, and admitted, I'm scared. I'm scared of being replaced. I'm scared my relevance is ending. Because here's the truth. Your relevance never ends if you keep evolving. Frank Sinatra had a career that spanned 6 decades, from the 1940s to the 1990s. He saw big band rise and fall. He saw rock and roll explode. He saw disco, punk, new wave hip-hop, and he survived it all. Not by fighting change, by embracing it. Elvis died in 1977, at 42 years old. Frank lived another 21 years. He performed his last concert in 1995, at 80 years old, and passed away in 1998. Before he died, a reporter asked him about his biggest regret. Frank thought for a moment, then said, taking so long to realize that the kids coming up aren't your enemies. They're your legacy. Nancy Sinatra donated her father's notes and personal items to the Smithsonian in 2003. Among them was a photograph from that 1960 television special. Frank and Elvis, arms around each other's shoulders, both laughing. On the back, in Frank's handwriting, the night I learned to let go. So what do we do with this story? What does it mean for us watching from decades in the future? Maybe it means this: the next time you see someone doing things differently, Someone younger, someone breaking rules you think are sacred, someone threatening the way you've always done things. Pause. Ask yourself, am I criticizing because they're wrong or because I'm scared? And if the answer is fear, do what Frank did. Walk up to them, look them in the eye, and say, "You're not replacing me. You're adding a new chapter. And I'm going to learn from you." Because that's what great artists do. That's what great people do. They don't tear down what came before. They build on it. They honor it. They transform it into something new. There's a plaque now at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. It's in the hallway between the dressing rooms, right where Elvis and Frank had their conversation in 1960. The plaque reads, "On this spot, two legends made peace. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley taught us that change isn't the enemy. Fear is. And the only way to beat fear is with truth, respect, and the courage to evolve." Visitors stop to read it every day. Some take photos. Some just stand there quietly, thinking about their own fears, their own resistance to change, their own opportunities to evolve. Jimmy Rosselli, the stagehand who overheard the conversation, gave an interview before he died in 2011. He was 92 years old, living in a retirement home in New Jersey. A music historian tracked him down, hoping to verify the story. "Did it really happen?" the historian asked. "Did Frank really apologize?" Jimmy nodded slowly. "I was holding a microphone stand," he said, "pretending to adjust it. But I heard every word. And I'll tell you something else. I saw Frank's face when he said it. He wasn't performing. He wasn't acting. That was the real Frank Sinatra, admitting he was wrong. And I've been in this business 50 years. I've seen a lot of egos, but I've never seen that kind of courage before or since." He paused, eyes distant. "Changed my whole life, that moment. Made me realize that strength isn't about never being wrong. It's about being brave enough to admit when you are." So here's the final question. Who in your life deserves an apology? Not because they've earned it, not because it'll benefit you, but because you were scared and you lashed out, and deep down you know they weren't your enemy, they were just different. Maybe it's a coworker doing things a new way. Maybe it's a younger person challenging your expertise. Maybe it's an entire generation whose music, fashion, or values you don't understand. Whoever it is, you have a choice. You can be Frank Sinatra in 1956, scared, angry, defensive, attacking what threatens you. Or you can be Frank Sinatra in 1960, brave, humble, honest, extending your hand and saying, "I was wrong. Help me understand. Help me evolve." Because here's what Frank and Elvis proved that night in Miami Beach. Legends aren't born. They're not chosen. They're not given crowns and thrones. Legends are built by people brave enough to tell the truth, even when the truth is, "I don't have all the answers. I'm scared. I'm learning. And I need you." That's the legacy. Not the records sold. Not the awards won. Not the fame or fortune or applause. The legacy is the moment when you look fear in the face and choose evolution over ego. March 26, 1960. Miami Beach. Two legends. One conversation. And a lesson that echoes 65 years later. What will you do with it? Will you fight the change that scares you? Or will you walk up to it, extend your hand, and say, "Teach me. Let's evolve together"? The answer determines not just your legacy, but who you truly are. Elvis knew. Frank knew. Now you know. The question is, will you be brave enough to act on it?